Well, I'm going to introduce the next keynote speaker. It is my pleasure to introduce Hilary Carter, Vice President of Research at the Linux Foundation. Hilary leads the creation of decision-useful insights into open source technology standards. Hilary will be speaking about developer-centric insights and opportunities. Please join me in welcoming Hilary up on stage.
Whoa. Sound good? Okay, thank you. And it's far side. Morning, everybody. And thank you, Ramon. It is a pleasure to be here, really. I feel very honored to have been asked. I did speak briefly yesterday on the main stage. If any of you saw my presentation, there are a few slides that overlap, but I am excited to be part of this community. I'm super excited about tonight's drone show. Prior to my joining Linux Foundation, I was at a think tank called the Blockchain Research Institute, where we explored the role of blockchain technology specifically in some hardware applications, specifically the convergence with 3D printing. And what is true is the extent to which hardware industries are becoming increasingly software defined, and the role of blockchain to secure digital assets and their interplay in hardware integration is really quite fascinating. In truth, we have not done a lot of research yet at the Linux Foundation specific to open hardware, but I hope that my experience with you all today and learning more about the work of PX4 will inspire us to do more, because I think there's some incredibly exciting applications for hardware and converging technologies and hardware being increasingly software defined. So forgive me if much of my talk is specific to the research we have done, which focuses largely on open source software and yes, some standards. I've tried to make it as specific to the developer community as possible. So here's what I want to talk about today. I will briefly introduce LF Research, why we were formed, what we do, what our deliverables are. I'll share some fun facts that I have learned about the developer community from the 15 research projects that we have published to date. I'll share some soon-to-publish developer-focused research, and I'll encourage you to get involved. One of the things that is very rewarding for me in my role leading LF Research is the extent to which I get to engage with all facets of our community. Research, as I'll explain, is not conducted in a silo. It's very much created by the community, for the community, and consequently we create a utility that's open, that's widely available, and is designed to be decision useful. What we're doing here is creating a resource that helps inform strategy, helps inform policy, helps inform decision making, budget formation, and so on and so forth. So I encourage you all to leverage the utility to become part of it, and let LF Research be a voice for your activities and concerns. Take our surveys, give an interview, and let us know how we can improve programming to enhance the developer experience broadly and to influence other types of activations that advance your community's agenda. So I will invite all of you to please visit linuxfoundation.org/research. This is the home for all of our publicly available research projects. We were launched in March of 2021. Prior to the establishment of LF Research, the Linux Foundation had been conducting some pretty significant research projects, including the Linux kernel history report, which essentially described the extent to which the best practices and tooling specific to Linux kernel development led to its ubiquity and significance. And I think that model of mass collaboration to create Linux as the universal operating system is readily applicable across all technology projects. In 2020, Linux Foundation also ran the FOSS Contributor Survey in collaboration with Harvard. a huge survey from which we learned a lot about developers. And one of the most significant findings was that, what motivates the developer community? Often it is not purely monetary considerations. There's a lot of intrinsic motivation at play. And those findings set the stage for Linux Foundation to conduct much more research. And so LF Research was founded to do just that. Create more insights, help create data that will inform how we can strengthen our project communities broadly. What can you expect from Linux Foundation research deliverables? Well, we have a series of reports. There's always a written report. There's always a series of infographics, which are readily shareable across channels. You'll see me using some slides. These are our infographics at play, and they're very interoperable across social media networks and Google Slides. So I welcome you to avail yourself of any of these infographics that you may wish to use in presentations and so on. We write blogs, we have webinars and event panels and so on. One of the most important tenets of LF Research is having access to open data. So if we conduct a survey, we're going to make sure that the survey results with personally identifiable information removed is a publicly available resource. And the QR code that you see links to the survey findings that are available on data.world, an open source project. So if you're interested in doing your own research or do your own crosstabs of any kind of surveys that we have done, feel free to access the data sets. We have a few to update based on reports that were just released this week. But that's where you'll find our data sets. If you're curious and want to do your own research, hit up data.world. So how do we go about our work at LF Research? Well, first thing we do is look at open source from the point of view of the industry vertical. And so far we published projects in the financial services industry, in film and entertainment, education and training, and I'm missing something, energy. And we're telling stories about how open source is changing opportunities within industries, sometimes across them as well. The other way we're looking at open source is at the technology horizontal level. What's happening in blockchain? What's happening in open hardware? Why are these community activities significant to the advancement of technologies? We've published projects in AI, in data and storage, and a couple of projects in blockchain, one specific to non-fungible tokens, and the fact that not all blockchains are equally carbon intensive. But we'll be doing more at different tech horizontals in the future, including open hardware. We also look at activities broadly that don't necessarily fit into industry vertical or tech horizontal, but ecosystem-wide issues. Topics like standards, security of software supply chains and security of hardware, leadership, diversity, equity, inclusion, and so on. And in fact, I think if there were a focus and a mandate for LF Research to prioritize, it is on the subject of securing software supply chains. That has been our top priority to research since our inception. So you might see us over-indexed on security, but you can't have too much research on security. There is so much that we can do, and there's so much that we need to do. But we've kicked off a couple of exciting security projects as well. And we realized after a year that 3 frameworks was not quite comprehensive enough on how we view open source activity, that there was another way to look at open collaboration, and it was along geographic lines. What's happening globally? What's happening unique to regions? What's happening in Europe, and how's that different from what's going on in North America and Asia? What's happening at specific country level? And so we launched a whole new series which we branded World of Open Source, and this brings home the reality that open is a global phenomenon with regional dynamics. And it's incumbent upon all of us to keep the bridges of global collaboration alive and to understand the regional dynamics so that we can continue to collaborate as a global community to get the very best software, hardware, and standards. So now I'm going to dive into some fun facts, what I've learned about developers in my journey at LF Research. So one of the greatest figures, this is an example of our infographic, is that open source development is fun. This particular stat came from our financial services research project. Most people in the space are having a good time doing it. That's a very positive signal. It's really rewarding. It's very healthy signal for communities that people generally show up because they enjoy doing this. So wonderful, wonderful stat. We use this quite often, especially encouraging people to get involved, bringing in new contributors to the community. This is a good one. Developers also take a significant personal interest in their work. They participate because there's some kind of interest beyond their day job that they want to advance a particular technology for one reason or another. A lot of intrinsic motivation, super exciting. Training is really important for the developer community. 2/3 need more training to effectively do their jobs. And the environment is constantly shifting, the demands are changing, security environment's changing. We're continually launching new education and training programs at the Linux Foundation to try to keep up with the changing dynamics and needs for more qualified devs to do their jobs. So that's a gap that we're trying very, very hard to fill. It is a continual work in progress. Here's an interesting reality for many developers who want to contribute, but find they are constrained by their day jobs, because nearly half of our respondents from our financial services survey said that there are policies in place that heavily restrict or prohibit upstream contributions, whether they be private contributions or on behalf of the organization. This finding is true outside of financial services and other highly regulated industries like healthcare or the public sector. And this informs how we engage with regulators, that we need to have conversations. We need to host roundtables and convey the value of open source and dispel myths and misperceptions of what's going on so that these types of friction points can be eased or outright removed. There's fear and misunderstanding, and it's incumbent upon all of us to engage so that we can have more favorable policy frameworks to let developers do what they do best and create better technologies. We know that devs build software-defined industries, and having come from the blockchain space, I saw this significantly, that industries are being redefined and increasingly software-defined because of the work of ground up, of peer-to-peer communities and projects. And they go from the ground and they start to impact the entire industry. Additive manufacturing and blockchain, for example, is software redefining the whole additive manufacturing industry. Why is this significant? Well, if we think of computer-aided design files as a digital asset with intellectual property that needs to be secured and transferred across a digital platform from the creator, from the designer, to the 3D printer, and secure that asset and have perfect traceability, that's software interplaying with the manufacturing process. And the same implication is true for hardware. It's protection of IP. And we'll see this is significant in hardware spaces, particularly like aerospace, where the presence of fraudulent parts is rampant. One of the stats I learned in my previous roles, that 40% of parts, hate to tell everybody this, but in our aircrafts, commercial aircraft and military aircraft, 40% of parts are fraudulent. Cannot tell traceability with a high degree of confidence. There's a lot of fraudulent parts circulating out there. So software integrating with hardware and manufacturing gives us greater trust in our systems, greater trust in our machines. And these innovations come from developers who see these problems and they create solutions and they find their way up the industry chain, which is really quite exciting. But change is hard, and it's difficult to compel decision makers in leadership positions in airlines or in the military to adopt these technologies. So it's advocacy, and that comes from the community who understand the tools and their value. SBOMs, we did a report on software bill of materials, and this too has great significance in hardware for particularly medical equipment that the machines that are used in hospitals are safe, and that we know what dependencies exist within them, and so that when there's a problem, we can solve that problem quickly. This is the benefit for devs, knowing what's in your libraries and components and so on. And as I've alluded, developers are terrific ambassadors. Keep up the awesome work. It's how change happens. This particular project, where Carol Payne is quoted from Netflix, is from research we did in film and entertainment, where it was the engineers who convinced the lawyers and the decision makers in Hollywood film studios to share IP and to come together as an industry and work out common problems. And let's go compete on story and art and creativity, but let's not compete on tech stacks. And it was the developers who led this charge, and they came together and had a dialogue with decision makers. But it was the developers who were compelling. And it's that advocacy that led to the formation of the Academy Software Foundation, which is a Linux Foundation hosted project. It's one of the best examples of fierce competitors coming together, working together to solve common challenges specific to their industry. And that's thanks to a lot of passionate devs who led that charge. If you're not an open source developer, there are a lot of benefits to becoming one. The open source is a terrific community. There are resources and so many benefits to build on the work of others and not have to go it alone. So if you're not yet involved in open, PX4, it's a great community. Spread the word and reap the benefits. Risk mitigation is one of the great reasons of participating in open source communities. Accepting external viewpoints. There's reduced risk of just making the wrong decision because someone else has figured it out, and you've got that support. We do know there's a lot of pressure and a lot of responsibility shouldered on a very few number of critical maintainers and developers. A recent study with Harvard, Census 2, identifying the most widely used software applications, identified that there are only 136 developers who are responsible for a majority of code in one of the top 50 packages. Everybody's seen that graphic with the little peg on it, that a big application is resting on the shoulders of one or two people. We do have to think about succession. We do have to think about the pressure that is on maintainers. It's a community-wide issue that we need to address. Demand exceeds supply. How fortunate for all of you that you're in the right place and that there is more demand for the creation of code than there are software and hardware developers able to create it. So, good career choice, and especially in this economy. Unfortunately, not all of our research is a happy story. Research sometimes reveals some uncomfortable truths, and our communities do suffer from discrimination, and 1 in 5 have been discriminated or feel unwelcome, so we have to figure out how we address that. What we do know is those people who do feel unwelcome in open source communities typically are from underrepresented groups. People of color, women, people from the LGBTQ community, people with disabilities. So think about how we engage diversity of thought, diversity of demographic, and why? Because diversity creates better tech. This is a well-established and well-researched fact. If you wish to create better technologies, have a diverse community to build them. So now I'll transition over to some of the research that we have just published that's very much focused on developer community, particularly with the OpenSSF, Open Source Security Foundation. I mentioned earlier, one of the reports that the Linux Foundation published in 2020 was the FOSS contributor study. That report revealed that there were only 2% of respondents who were spending their time working on security. I think if we ran that study again today, we might find an uptick based on the recent attacks from SolarWinds to Log4j and beyond. But here's the real issue, is that developers really don't enjoy working on security issues. They want to build features, and they're paid to build features, not fix bugs. So how do we go about incentivizing security-focused activity across our development communities? Money is not going to solve the problem alone. We need to find a different path. So Linux Foundation met with the governing board of the Open Source Security Foundation, Linux Foundation Research, in November. And we sat down with the governing board and we asked them, what data and insight do you need that is going to help drive the activities of the OpenSSF to better address security issues, to better incentivize developers? Where are the friction points? And we did that in November, and we had a vibrant and illuminating discussion. What we thought we would pursue is very different from what we ended up pursuing. But we asked them, do you need more census data? What are the most important packages in cloud applications? What do you need to know about SALSA implementations and understanding SALSA readiness? What are the regulatory priorities that need to be overcome? Do we need a vulnerabilities reporting system, and so on? And so we discussed a whole range of questions. And this activity led us to publish report, which was launched on Tuesday, addressing cybersecurity challenges in open source software, where we learned the extent to which organizations are ready or not for security challenges. What's the difference between large organizations and small organizations? We do know that there are security policies in place, but there are not enough of them. So policy and regulation is how we focus our programming efforts immediately. We do know very few organizations are managing dependencies effectively. We need to increase incentives, and yes, money is really important. It's not the only path, but it's very important. So where do we get those resources from? Fortunately, the Open Source Security Foundation is now a funded project, and new members are joining every day, and that's a vital signal and a very healthy signal for how we implement security practices going forward. So I encourage you to access the research report on Linux Foundation Research website and share it broadly. The other work we're doing is specific to maintainers, particularly those who maintain the most widely used applications. We want to know more about how we can support the maintainer community. What keeps maintainers up at night? What's the succession plan? Where do they live? How many projects do they work on? Is burnout real? Talk to us. We want to hear from you so that we can help. That's the goal of Linux Foundation research, is to create actionable insights to help our community advance their objectives. The maintainer community is an extremely important community that shoulders so much responsibility. So if you know maintainers, if you are a maintainer, please introduce them to me, and we'll start a conversation. For anybody who does engage with LF research, we respect your privacy. You're able to give an interview and it be completely anonymous. If you wish to be attributed, of course you may be. We're always interested in promoting thought leadership. Leadership is a really important element of creating change. And we need advocates, and we need people to tell their story publicly so that others see themselves in that journey. If somebody from organization X can do something, then wow, and they came forward publicly to talk about it, maybe I can do that too. That's why we need more people in research. The ideas stick, and it's hard to get inspired by data. It's really inspiring to hear about people's journeys. So yes, please do get involved. If you're from Europe, anybody here from Europe, resident of Europe? Ooh, wonderful. So this survey, World of Open Source, our first regional study, is in the field right now. And if you'd care to take our survey, we'd be absolutely delighted. We want to understand European dynamics. What are the regulatory issues? What are the priorities? Where is open source being adopted? We know that the developer community is alive and well in Europe, but we want to know what the developers are working on and where their tools are being deployed. Are OSPOs being formed? What's really going on in Europe? What if you're not from Europe? Well, I have another survey for you. It's the Open Source Program Office study for 2022. If you're an open source stakeholder, open hardware too, give it a go. All data is welcome, all insights are welcome, and we will share the findings for this study and the Europe study at Open Source Summit Europe in Dublin. Hopefully we'll see you all there. And again, this is a team sport. I can't do this alone. This is a resource created by the community for the community, so get involved. And if you have participated in any of our projects to date, thank you very much, and thank you for your kind attention.